And what I've noticed with banks, when they try to do too much, they boil the ocean, nothing's come out of it. You know how many projects I've seen that didn't go anywhere because they were trying to do too much? I am not a believer in this one-man show company which is scaling. You're probably interviewing a few of them. I don't buy that bullshit. There is a risk here because if you just bring the agents in and you don't think about the process, you're just paying the bill and you're not really getting the impact that you need. For AI to work at scale in a human-led environment, I think copilot is a terrible idea. That's what I think. I think that it has to be something much more embedded into the process. And I think that scaling it is a much more difficult process than what people see.
Today on Terminal Value, I'm joined by David Sosna, founder and CEO of Sympera AI. Sympera has raised a $10 million seed round to bring agentic AI into relationship banking. The company helps bankers identify which clients and prospects deserve attention and helps the bankers decide what to do next. We discuss whether AI will replace relationship bankers or dramatically expand the market they can serve, why the cost of frontier models is pushing companies towards a mix of frontier and open-weight technology, and whether vertical AI companies can build a lasting advantage over horizontal platforms like Salesforce. Now, onto the podcast. David, thank you so much for joining Terminal Value.
Sure, happy to be here.
So before we get into Sympera AI, I'd love to set some context for the audience just on relationship banking as it exists today. And so could you walk through just a high level on the banking space in the United States and also what the relationship manager's job is on a day-to-day today?
Well, I think first of all, it's a pretty large market. I think that you're probably talking about north of 500,000 people on a day-to-day basis, kind of that are managing relationship. People think about relationship as ultra rich, large corporates that have dedicated bankers that are working with them. But in reality, you're talking about a lot of mid-sized clients. They could be mass affluent, they could be businesses, smaller-ish growing mid-sized companies that are served by relationship bankers. These relationship bankers need to look for new business for the bank, need to look out for their existing customers, need to understand their needs and what are they going through, including understanding risk and development and stuff like that. They need to understand their businesses, although they're being assigned with fairly large book of businesses. So imagine a bank like that needs to understand manufacturing, legal, healthcare, and energy in the same day, which is kind of interesting. And they've been asked to both deliver the goods in terms of revenue and also service their clients.
So can I think about the relationship manager's job as really trying to drive increased loan utilization, increased banking, share of wallet? Is that kind of the financial goal of the relationship manager?
Yes. I think that, there's still banks that think about selling loans as kind of the main product. But I believe that, and we're seeing that more and more banks are thinking about relationship banking as also the primacy angle. So expanding the relationship, maintaining the primary account, combining more things, bundling. The idea is that, look, there's so many options out there today for a business, whether it's coming from banks or from fintech. And it's hard to compete on a product by product basis. But if you can provide them with a single place where they come in and get their service, I think that's a strong value add for these banks. And I think that that's probably the most important role of a relationship manager.
I see. So you hinted at the bifurcation of customers that they serve, or the complexity and the different products that they're offering to their customers. So can you walk me through, in today's landscape before Sympera, what are the tools that they're using to help them simplify their job today?
Well, first of all, a lot of them, I would say that they are veterans and they are also young bankers. As I said, it's a pretty large market. I would say 70% of the banks are using some CRM platforms of some sort. So they're used mostly in order to track activity. So the bankers are required to go in and to log their activity. These systems can send them automatic reminders if certain days have passed, since they can support them uploading documents. So it's like a centralized place where the banker can go in and upload or manage his activity. I would say utilization is depending on which bank you're asking for, but in general, these relationship managers see their prime role as generating business or expanding share of wallet. So they're not so keen on going in and just typing in information. So there's definitely a lot of conversation. Let's put it this way on the value and what do we really get from that part. Then I think that traditionally there are data or data tools or query tools. So there are tools that like a DNB, you can go in and you can research companies and you can figure out who they are, what's their revenue range, and what's going on with them. So these type of tools have been around for a long time, and I would say that they are good if you have a pretty good idea of who do you want to query and research for. And I think that the two main limitations around them is, number one, that the fact that they depend on you to ask the question, meaning the general idea is that you have a straightforward, direction, which is fine if you are an experienced banker and you have only 20 names that you're targeting. But imagine that you're covering, I don't know, the Charlotte area, which has, 2 million people, as a metropolitan, and now you're, breaking through and you want to grab and decide who you want to focus. So obviously it depends on you to know what questions to ask. And then the second thing is that a lot of these tools, they're less focusing on smaller companies. So they're pretty good if you have a public company where the data is there. But once you start to go down into companies that are more shy, that are more using a combination of, where the data has to be grabbed from multiple places, it's not as easy. So yes, there are data tools, but I think that it's a lot to do, a lot of dependency on the banker skill in terms of that ability. So I would say it's a pretty segmented world for a banker in order to kind of get his work done.
One question I had for you on the setup as it exists today. So when I was doing some research for this, obviously I imagine Salesforce is probably the predominant CRM tool, but companies like Encino as well, like are they primarily used for data or for actions kind of on that?
I think they're mainly focusing on automating a process, meaning loan origination, right? So that's a process and that's, by the way, it's a good AI use case. I think there are several companies that are trying to solve for that. And I think that there's definitely some good value there. What we are trying to think about is the revenue play or the share of wallet play. Meaning, okay, once you have a loan and you need to process it, that's great. I think there's definitely some challenges over there, and the AI can definitely streamline. But we're trying to think about, one step before that. What do you do? Like, where do you start? What's going to be your next move across the board, whether it's existing book or new to bank? And that's a revenue play, whether it's, again, extending or acquiring. Now, again, there are some major acquisition, trends going on. And one of the things that banks used to do, they used to buy banking teams with the entire book. So you would buy a bank, you would get their bankers, they all come in. But again, it's not a scale play. You're now depending still on people that have a certain or very good understanding of, okay, these are the companies, I know these guys, I can also take them, actually, I can take them with me. But if the bank wants to think about organic growth in terms of expansion, without being depending on a set of specific high-skilled banker, yeah, I think you have a scale issue, which what Sympera is trying to solve for.
I see. Okay. And so you've laid out nicely kind of the issue here, which is, there are a lot of existing tools today, but those tools really don't give guidance to that end relationship manager. And so could you walk us through at a high level, how do you pitch Sympera to a bank that hasn't really heard of AI utilization, has a traditional understanding of tools? Like, what is your high level pitch to Sympera before we get into kind of the product?
Yeah. So basically the idea is that we come to the bank and we're talking to him about, can we accelerate the opportunities? Can we accelerate or increase the size of the pipe, the revenue that you're trying to capture, and increase your share of wallet? And the way we're going to do that is that we'll put a system that will give it a general direction, and it will go out and source the things for you. It will not give you 100. Because again, then you have to ask yourself, then you are the one needs to ask all the questions. It will give you only five, but five that are really, really good, that have already all the information, that will have already all the data points that you need. And then it will track how you're doing it, but it will not just send you emails every 14 days and to say, hey, what's going on? It will actually tell you, hey, if you want to meet these guys, this is where you need to go in order to do that. It will try to make you behave like a pro or behave like the best by applying strategies that are gathered from a lot of bankers and try to embed it into your day-to-day work. So it is trying to elevate the banker skills. It is trying to narrow down the effort of the banker. It is trying to bring value in the beginning where the banker is trying to think, okay, who should I target? But also on the ongoing side of things where the banker needs to decide, where do I focus today and what do I do if I get stuck? And it is something that we can implement, and we're implementing across the board as something that will power the banker. I think what is interesting about this space, you're asking me about relationship banking, it is a regulated space. Unlike sales of over the web, where you can see AI SDRs taking over the work, this is not what's, at least for now, what's going to happen there. You will need to augment or elevate or upgrade the skills of the bankers by giving them more tools, making them more strong, versus putting something that will just do the work. So it is a play that is supposed to work with, on behalf, and supporting bankers, right? Which is interesting because all the usage patterns, yes, you're talking AI, but you're also talking about pushing, empowering, nudging, working with bankers, with people, in terms of giving them direction what to do. It's very obvious where you have a question and you want to go in and ask like a copilot, plan my trip, or maybe help me to decide between A and B. But think about the question of which company should I focus on today, or what should I say for this if I get stuck? So it's a much more action-based kind of workflow that we're trying to bring to them, to these bankers.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see kind of how you view the coaching copilot component versus more kind of the full cycle automation. So very interesting to hear that. But before we get into that, could you walk us through then? You've laid out a really good view of the space as it exists today and the high level for Sympera. Could you walk us through what that product workflow looks like end to end, really from setup and data ingestion all the way through that RM feedback?
Yeah. So I think that the starting point for us is to go in and talk to the manager and understand from him what are his priorities, which target is he going after, what type of products is he positioning, and how does they differentiate his bank versus others? Because in the end of the day, they have an edge or some sort of an edge. Then we take that information and we put it inside the tool. And now we tell the tool, hey, just go scout. So the tool takes that information and then goes outside and is trying to figure out from the universe of the definitions, the priorities that the manager set up, which top 5% of companies have an activity that makes sense for me to operate on right now, whether it's upcoming debt renewal, whether it's a management change, or whether it's involvement in an RFP project in some sort of a government setup. It will rank them. It will say, okay, these are good, these are better, these are best. It will take the best one. It will also look to see if there's any opportunity for the banker to reach out, not just by sending emails, because they don't like to do that. Can I find a mutual connection? Can I find a joint customer that this company is working with? Can I find a venue where I can go in and meet them? Are they participating in some, organization, some association that I can be a part of? So yeah, we will try to go and when we wait this all to get there, the banker will get from us, 5 names. Behind each name, we will prepare for him a call sheet. The call sheet will say, this is why we think this company is great, because we saw this type of activity, because you can get to these people and this is how you should do that. Because we think that they have already some lending activity with these banks, and we think that you can go after this because you have bigger pockets, you can position such and such. And then this is the type of pitch that we will focus on. Now, after we will do that, and we will ask the banker to provide feedback, to engage based on our recommendation. and to tell us, is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? What is the reason that he doesn't think it is a great fit for him? And then let the model digest that. After a few iterations, the model will start to behave slightly differently, and it will try to say, okay, this banker is really good at this, so we will move it here. And then this banker, and so on and so forth. And then again, after the initial contact, again, whether it's a new to bank or existing, the product will start to look for the next steps. And then it will try to say, okay, this is the feedback that the banker gave us. This is what is happening right now with the company. This is what we think you should do next. And then it will come up with the next set of actions. And that's going to be an ongoing process that we will do. We have one place for existing customers where we'll also connect into their balances and accounts, and we can figure out, okay, they have a renewal coming up. They have activity already with an external, payment building services. So yes, there's something we can do over here versus completely new to bank. And based on these types, we can actually go in and suggest provide the right set of actions.
Let's see. I want to congratulate you on the Republic Bank of Chicago. I read the report, and within there, just as you guys expanded that relationship, they mentioned that a key to that was this concept of a 90% lead accuracy threshold. And as you're walking through kind of the setup, one of the points that you speak about is just the data, both the internal and external data that's required. And so how do you guys think about that as you are driving to accuracy of lead generation? How do you think about what type of data to pull in internally, externally, and just a general philosophy on that?
First of all, some of the data that we're using is data that is publicly available, but some you will have to purchase and some you will have to map from the bank. Now, banks typically don't like to share their data. It's obviously something very important for them. So we had to build a setup, right? A technology that does some of the work outside and then some of the work inside. And only when we have our arguments and insights and signals ready to go, we will do the last step without compromising, without sharing any bank data. So we are able to provide the bank a solution that kind of takes away the need to expose data. Now, the second part of the story over here is the ability to understand if a data point means something or not, and then how accurate are you in driving that conclusion. These LLMs that are out there today, and they are getting better, have a set of, they are providing decent results, but they also make mistakes. And if you do it on a large scale, you're going to start to see these mistakes kind of piling up. So what we had to do, we had to develop a set of techniques, models, that what it allows us to do, it allows us to ask questions, get results, and then monitor all the time and validate the accuracy of the results. And only if we're validated, then we can take them to the next step, ask another question, and then move on. So imagine that you have certain steps along the way. You start with one question, you decide based on the answer if you want to continue asking it again. And then by a sequence of, I would say, 9 to probably 15 steps, we're able to create the full document that we need in order to decide if we want to approach this company or not, and what are the data points that we want to use. So we have to take into consideration both the data and the security of the data. We have to take into account the fact that we have to integrate or bring the data to us, because again, not all of this data is available. Like, you have to integrate it, you have to buy it, you have to source it, you have to do different things. And the last thing, which is kind of interesting, you have to validate all the time the results of what you're getting when you try to evaluate the ranking, the context, the importance, the relevance, all of those things. You try to see if the answer from the LLM is indeed correct or not.
Yeah.
And you have to do it all the time, by the way, all the time.
So I've been doing this podcast now for the better part of a quarter, and it's incredible how quickly it went from, oh my God, the model layer is going to take everything, to people really understanding how important proprietary data is. And that second part you just spoke to, the error rate in the models, even frontier models for these really important pieces.
Yep.
So how do you decide when something is good enough? Like, because you probably need a feedback loop, right? You need that feedback loop from the customer to say, hey, this lead actually landed, right?
So when we started to build Sympera, one of our team members Daniel is an expert in basically tuning agents. And what he suggested is that we will bring a set of experts into the equation and allow them to provide feedback on the output that we bring. We generated a pretty large set of qualified or validated answers. And then we started to go and try to tune them up to make sure that we tweak the models based on the outputs that we're providing. Now, today we're doing it on an ongoing basis. So we have a pre-expectation of what is the error rate that we are allowing these models to operate in. And we keep tuning them. Right now we get about, 10% feedback from the stuff that we're sending out from the real bankers. So we are, meaning the machine is not 100% error-proof, but it's pretty accurate. So when we see that we get feedback like that, we go back and put it back in. And right now we have a fairly interesting flow that is able to generate high quality results on a large scale. Now, you talked about the understanding that models are wrong and you have to control them. There's a third element over here, which is cost. These models are also very expensive. Now try to think about a scenario where, again, go back to that. Okay, you're on the market. You have 1,000 companies. You know that at any moment in time, 3-4% of them are really good, 40 of them. But if you scan the 1,000 and you spend 40 cents on each one, that's going to be quite expensive in terms of how much you're ready to pay for 40 companies. So one of the interesting things that we're doing, we have proprietary tools on our side that do what we call the initial scan. And they tell us, hey, this look interesting and this not. And then we go inside and start to dig. So we had to develop a whole new strategy just to operate at scale. I don't think many people yet are in that kind of mindset because that's the difference between a copilot and an automated system. But if you are planning an automated system, you have to think about the fact that you're monitoring it on a day-to-day basis all the time. So yeah, you can do it probably with GPT. Let's put the error aside, but you have to ask it to generate queries all the time. And probably after a few days, I'm sure that the bill will start to ramp up and you're not going to like it. So yeah, I think that's a third challenge. And I believe that many companies will start to think about it very soon because the cost is piling up.
You beat me to this next question around the token maxing theme. It felt like the space moves so fast, right? Like last quarter, everyone was trying to figure out how do I, just get everyone to use AI. And then the Uber, CTO comes out and said, I blew through my entire budget. Did you guys go through, or where are you guys in that journey of kind of token maxing to driving cost efficiency, just in your own internal development process?
I think that we were a little bit lucky because from day one, we had the understanding that if we try to query all the companies in the market, we will run out of money. Meaning we knew that that's a limitation that we had to deal with. So we started the company understanding that we have to develop something on our own that will do the initial step first before you go in and start to spend the money. Meaning you had to create a process to say, okay, I'll go here, I'll narrow it down, I'll go there, and basically use different models as you go. Almost take the cheapest one, the one that you can really kind of deploy on a large scale, filter it, do it again. We built it probably about a year and a half ago, knowing actually upfront that unless we do that, we cannot provide it to our customers. So again, right now, if we are supporting today hundreds of bankers in the market, we're probably scanning every week, tens of thousands of companies. And believe me, I'm not paying to scan each one of them. That's not what I'm doing right now, right?
On that thread, one of the points I've just been interested, frankly, is from an investment landscape overall, is operators' point of views on frontier model usage. Yeah, we're seeing in the news today, NVIDIA is considering backstopping a $250 to $500 billion data center for OpenAI. And what that assumes is, well, either utilization is going to be dramatically larger than even the increased supply, or people will continue to use frontier models and drive margin to these companies that can then pay back NVIDIA. And so from your point of view, do you guys feel like you will continue to need to use frontier models for use cases or for new use cases? Or do you see a world where you just optimize on open source and fine-tuned models?
So yes, I think we're definitely on let's call it a combination where we have, already a lot of the work done by second type of open source and other tools that we built versus the first one. I also think that it's very dangerous to rely on one particular model. So we use a multi-model approach because we feel that it's not a good thing to say, okay, we think OpenAI 5.6 is best in class and it does things that no one does. And then they do a change over there and that's it, you're done. So you have to build a strategy, I think, if you are a serious company, to rely at least on 2-3 models in your process. And I think that for every company which is now trying to build an enterprise level, process, you have to rely on a combination of, call them tools, whether it's open source or tuned or machine learning or whatever you are doing over there, with a combination of best-in-class models. I think it has to be that way. Otherwise, you're going to get into trouble at some point, I think, with your scale strategy.
What is your gut in terms of your utilization of frontier models, medium term? Do you think that both for your internal coding and for your own inference in your product, do you think you'll need frontier models continuously, or you'll find new use cases, or what's your point of view on that?
So they're definitely better. I mean, I think that if you look at the last year and you take 4 versus, what else, the evolution of the models, you're definitely seeing them better. But are they justifying the price? I'm not sure. Meaning we are still able to use year-old model in certain ways and without switching to a new one. And if we think that it's more cost effective, we will do that. I think, if you have to analyze a document or classify or do some stuff like that, I'm not sure that you need best-in-class model. If you take one of these new models and you ask it a question, and as you know, they charge you on tokens, but they also charge you on queries. You don't know exactly. I don't think in OpenAI you really know how many queries the tool does, but you're paying for it. So would I use it if I'm now building a system like this? I'm not 100% sure. I think it's a very, kind of dangerous move, because if you provide it to 100,000 users, so if OpenAI decided to ask one query pair or 10, someone will have to pay for the build. So I'm not sure that's a good idea, frankly.
Yeah, David, your answer, particularly on the inference side, resonates a lot with most of the founders I've spoken to. And the part that becomes interesting just from like a model company economics layer is like, at what point does the coding not need the majority of the own coding to go to frontier? But it'll be an interesting kind of question to see where the market lands on that.
Yeah, I believe that there's still certain areas where you're saying, listen, one company, one model beats the rest, but it can't be the large majority of your pipe. It just can't be.
You hinted at this earlier. You were talking about sort of this concept of a copilot versus just true autopilot. And if I understand correctly, you said today, because it's a regulated industry, you need it more of a kind of copilot manner. But do you see the product over time evolving to be more autonomous in terms of outreach, communication, or not really in this space?
The only question is how long? Meaning today we can generate actions automatically, but when it comes to reaching out, we will provide the banker with a template and say, hey, click here. Now, will they allow us to chat with the client, to actually talk to the client? Yeah, I think the tech is there. I think that we can definitely do that. Will that pass compliance today? No, I don't think so. I think that there will still be a little bit of time before something like that will go in. Look, it's hard to say. We're working in the most conservative industry in the world right now, which is banking. I think for companies like us that are building these things and are building experience in their models, I think it's a great thing that we can do it before we have to decide if we want to fully automate or not. By the time we will need to actually take that decision or provide the use case, we will have the benchmarks, the models that we can prove and use and showcase for, that the bank will trust us to do that. Because the bank will not trust a generic model that have not done it before a lot of times in this particular use case. But I would say not today, not tomorrow.
The US is very interesting in that the banking space is much more dispersed than other countries. And there are community banks, regional banks, and larger institutions. And so do you have today a niche that you target within that? Or I would love to understand kind of how you specifically go to market.
It's a very good question. So I think, right now we are serving customers from all sizes. I think the way they're adopting it is a little bit different in terms of really large ones versus small ones. But I think that overall, they all have, I would say, a similar set of challenges in terms of driving banker action. I think that if you are a small community bank and you want to compete and you want to try even to grow, but you don't want to actually go in and buy a new team of bankers, I think that frankly, you have no choice. On the other hand, I think that if you're a large bank and you already have a very strong CRM infrastructure, but your utilization is a problem and you can see that you're not able to drive, I also don't think that you have a lot of options. I think what is interesting for us in Sympera is that we can go and sell to and integrate and partner with very large banks, but also with very small banks because the implementation is like, really super quick and it can be done in a way that a bank can be up and running like really, really quickly. I think that for us, the ultimate kind of partnerships that we're looking for is banks that are trying to grow, meaning forget about the size, that they understand that in order for them to expand their businesses, it's not about acquiring another bank, it's about investing in their bankers. I think that's a very, very strong kind of sign for us. When we see that a bank is talking about, hey, I want to invest in my, banker technology, I want to grow, or versus I want to just buy 10 other banks and do integration, I think for us is a good sign where we want to go and where we want to spend our energy.
I see. At whatever level of detail or abstraction you're comfortable with, can you walk me through how do you guys think about pricing from a philosophical standpoint? Is it utilization based because of AI? Do you try and simplify the packaging for the end customer? Like, how do you think about that?
So simplifying it is a very important kind of concept for us. So yes, we do have what I was hope to be a pretty simplified structure. What we do, we break down the proposition into something which is more, let's call it fixed, and then something which is more usage based, something relates to activity. And we go to the bank and say, hey, you need to do this. And then this is also based on how you grow. So we're trying to split it in a way that will represent a true partnership. Look, there is a risk with companies like us, for us, where we go in and work with banks and bank can take us for spins and nothing will come out of it. So we have to give the right pricing model to allow us to work with these banks because they have a lot of demands, frankly. And on the other hand, I do believe that you have to provide them with the right structure so they can grow, meaning they cannot go in and just, put it all in because it does take time. Meaning it's not a technology thing, it's a human thing. It's how banks work. So, and the pricing structure does need to support that. Yeah, absolutely.
So do you feel like what seemed obvious a quarter ago of like more and more utilization based, that'll be the trend? Or do you feel over time that operators will get really comfortable and understand the outcomes they drive and will kind of move back to some sort of simplified non-usage based pricing model?
I hope it will land somewhere in the middle because again, if you go outcome based only, that means that first of all, there are some banks that will say that's great, but we're not ready to pay the upside. If this thing will do really well, then why are you going to actually take a portion of what we do? And that's not a good thing. So, it goes both ways. I have experience with success models and other models, and there's always a problem with defining what it means also from an upside perspective. I think a middle ground will be the right thing, where the bank can come and say, yes, I'm ready to invest, but I need to do it in steps where I can actually, feel out the technology, understand what it does, and only if it works for me, then I can scale it and take it to the next level.
David, this is not your first rodeo. You founded and successfully exited other companies in this space. Has the deployment motion dramatically changed, or is a forward deployed engineer essentially, more technical customer success manager? Like, how do you see that deployment motion evolving, if at all?
Well, I think things are kind of easier today in today's world. I think some of the technology challenges that we had to deal with 10 years ago, have been solved. So I think that life is easier from that perspective. On the other hand, I think that the user training and the design processes in terms of processes are hard right now because the AI, what it does, it also changes the process. So you have to go and imagine for them what will be a new process. And then you have to go and invest in education and do it again and again. Your tech could be the best in the world. But I think that in a world where AI is supporting humans, the humans also need to change their process for the AI to work. And that goes both for bankers and for coding, by the way, as I see in my own internal shop. And I think that that's the hard part, frankly, which was not maybe required a few years ago, but I think now it's a must. So
I see. The switching a bit to the competitive landscape, I'd love to understand when you're speaking with a bank and in a deal motion, who are you going up against typically? Is it your traditional sales forces with agent forces? Is it a more modern competitor?
I think Salesforce is always there, and I think Salesforce, rightfully so, is trying to build a lot of strong use cases about with AI. But I think that they need specialized expertise, which they don't have, and so I feel that I would say the following: for everything that sits within Salesforce, meaning all following up on notes or capturing the recording, whatever. I think they should be fine, and they should be able to provide capabilities that will compete. And so I'm not worried about that. I think anything to do with more verticalized capabilities where the data is a play, I think that's going to be a problem for them. What we are facing most is really, in my mind, first of all, uncertainty. Banks that saying, yeah, that's a good idea for us. We should consider that. I don't know, with Salesforce. Now, whether that will happen, probably not, but it's still a question that the banks will raise. And I think that the second thing, you have still, data providers there that can provide you information about companies that you can query them. And then the question is the process change? What you're trying to really communicate to the banks that we're trying to change the process altogether, where we will be the proactive, agent behind the scene. We will try to give the bankers direction, ongoing direction, and that's a complete change in process. Now, initially, I think it takes time a little bit to understand that. And I think that's what we are mostly against, the process change. I would say the last statement I will say, it's a very confusing landscape right now in general. Because look, all the big boys, they want to be AI. And all the small guys, each one of them has a small use case. So the bank is confused a little bit, in terms of where to go. And that's not a Sympera issue. I think that's an enterprise issue altogether.
The piece you mentioned, which I think is just an interesting conundrum for the big horizontal SaaS players, is it's no longer just if you're a more verticalized company. It's not just the workflow; it's the knowledge embedded within that workflow that companies like yourselves can offer. And so that's a very interesting challenge for a horizontal SaaS player to be able to do really well in each vertical. So yeah,
it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. Yeah,
it's even harder than beating against your past vertical SaaS companies. That's very interesting. It's good for you guys actually in companies like yourselves.
Yeah, but on the flip side, Salesforce is and other companies are doing great in terms of making noise. They're very noisy right now in the market. Meaning these guys are geniuses in terms of marketing all day long, and I can see why they're doing that. So yes,
yeah. And to your point, they have the incumbent go-to-market advantage. So our last year before we sold to American Express, they basically came because we were on Salesforce for our outreach, and came to us and they said, your bill is going to be 8 or 9% larger than last year. It's like, we can't do anything. We're not going to go through a CRM migration. And they, shoved Agentforce into that deal. Now, whether it's deployed correctly and utilized correctly and great for our setup, but to your point, incumbents do have.
Look, Microsoft did the same with Copilot. I'm not sure if you've seen the usage rate, but I know of a few banks that actually deployed Copilot for the entire banking population. Now, deploying versus usage is a whole different story, but that's what they did. Yeah, that's what they did. Yeah.
Do you see the system of record companies kind of coming in? You kind of hit this with Salesforce. I always ask, do you see model companies infringing? Do you see system of record?
Look, I think that companies like us should think about ourselves as an important part of the ecosystem, but I don't believe that we should consider ourselves as the prime kind of or the only agent base. So I think that what's going to happen, the bank will gradually move into a situation that he has an ecosystem of agentic capabilities. I think the protocol is still remain to be kind of determined how they're going to talk to one another. Where will the context is the most important thing. So all the agents will actually see the same thing and we will be a part of that. I think the book and record companies have actually a big role. They can create the context for everything if they will think about that correctly. And I think companies like us will own processes. A lead generation process, a nurturing process, a mortgage origination process, to your point. So I think that there are agents that will own certain processes, but they will all have to communicate vis-a-vis a centralized piece of context that will be managed by, Databricks, Salesforce, or the core provider. And I think that will give the flexibility for the banks to do also plug and play, because they cannot rely on someone like Salesforce to give them all the agents. It's not going to happen.
I
So,
see. And so is your point of view in that model that for the processes your own, the harness contextualization around those processes, you'll differentiate there, and then kind of the orchestration will sit with another company like a Databricks or a ServiceNow?
although the problem is that in our use case, not all the data sits in Databricks, and it's not going to be effective for us to try to bring it into Databricks. It's going to be too expensive. So we will have to rely on a combination of data that we bring and data that we can grab from Databricks. But I think that we have to communicate back our results back to them and ask them what else is out there about the user, because that will bring the ecosystem into a place that everyone will have the same language. But that will take time. And I'm also not sure who's going to hold the context. Salesforce wants to do it, the core banking provider will want to do it, and Databricks want to do it as well. So
the only person who's going to win in that is going to be the person selling the database space to hold all that context. So everyone's going to have duplicative context.
Yes, but I actually a strong believer in going after individual processes and showcase the value. Look, in previous cases, to your point, I've done it before, and what I've noticed with banks, when they try to do too much, they boil the ocean, nothing's come out of it. You know how many projects I've seen in one of these chases, BOA City, that, again, this is just, I'm giving them as acronyms, not by that didn't go anywhere because they were trying to do too much. Right? I think going with these, let's call them AI use cases that have actually real meat is probably the right thing to do for any bank right now, because that will also prove the point.
Yeah, lack of focus kills. I'd love to get your point of view on just how the organizational structure changes and your vision on that. So you built companies over multiple software generations and you staffed against those. How do you see Sympera's organizational structure relative to the past companies that you built in terms of, employee efficiency, how many people you actually need?
Yes, so like any other software company, we are evaluating our processes and we're trying to optimize them or build them in the right way so it will fit the technology or the AI capabilities that we're using. And we're also using some of these copilots for the internal use. I think the interesting things that I'm seeing right now is that our product management, as people used to call it right now, is much more integrated into the process. In some cases, it is generating code that it is being inserted inside. And in many cases, it is generating outputs that are prototypes, artifacts that are not longer product design, product documents. I think the hierarchy structure is different right now. I think that an engineer right now that understands a little bit more of the business problem, that has a set of agents around him, can do a phenomenal job. And we're trying to move into that part. We are seeing challenges with how to utilize these tools, how to drive them. And the third thing that we're trying to do, and I know many companies are trying to do that, we're trying to build our own Sympera context for how we develop stuff. So these agents that we're using, they all understand it. Now, the easiest thing to do is to allow them just read the entire repository. The only problem is that if you do that, the bill will start to look like, the Uber guy, right? So you have to build some sort of a hierarchy in terms of how you're describing your internal development, your repositories or your hierarchy of repositories. So the agent can come and say, okay, I only need to look at this and understand how to think about the use case. And then I can go here, pick the code, look at it and change it. These are not easy to do. And we are actually optimizing toward that and working on that. But I can tell you right now, we have less pure development folks, vis-a-vis previous companies that I have. And the time that we take in terms of kind of thinking about this versus putting it in, because of how we build the product and the R&D, is completely different. It's a whole new ballgame. I think there's still room for improvement in terms of how to make the agents really kind of operate in the entire repository of Sympera. And I also think that in terms of kind of understanding the results and the measurement and the benchmark, I think we can use better, the agents a little bit better than what we're doing right now. But in my mind, in my previous companies, I always remember kind of looking at pretty significant R&D teams, much better, much bigger than any other team in the company. And that was the right thing for me to do. And I think for everyone else, it was kind of the proof that the company is doing that. It's not longer the case. Now, I am not a believer in this one-man show company, which is scaling. You're probably interviewing a few of them. I don't buy that bullshit.
I'll
I
let
don't.
them know.
Yeah, you should let them know. Maybe call me an old guy, but I just don't believe in that. But yes, I do believe in the right balance, and I do know. I have a lot of VPs of R&Ds that are friends of mine. There is a risk here because if you just bring the agents in and you don't think about the process, you're just paying the bill and you're not really getting the impact that you need. And I think that you have to take it very seriously into how the methodology is changing as well.
How do you see the employment landscape for relationship managers changing as Sympera continues to proliferate, other agentic products proliferate? Do you see this as curtailing employment long term, or do you see this as opening up more opportunities that are today just going?
I actually think the opposite, because our vision is scaling them, meaning I think that they can be more effective and they can make more money for the bank if they are deployed correctly. Look, right now, if you think about where these banks are making money, they have the large corporates, and then in the middle, they have companies that are, I don't know, $5 to $100 million in revenue, and they have individuals that are able to invest, I don't know, $1 million, or maybe actually, have $500,000 to $2 million. Those are untapped, meaning they are, but they're not utilized as they should be. They're generating probably, 25, 30% of the bank activity. They should generate much more. And I think the reason for that is that the relationships are not managed correctly over there. They can do so much better. And frankly, I think that if they don't do that, the individual product companies will eat them alive. You actually worked in a company like that. What was the advantage of every bank trying to compete with you, if not the overall arching management of the relationship? That's their competitive edge. That's where they need to invest. If you come in and sign for a product deal and there's no relationship behind it, then you'll quickly turn off or use it very little and go to another shop. It's not really a banking primary relationship. You're just utilizing a product, in my mind.
Yeah, Sudarshan mentioned this. I was watching a presentation he was giving at a conference. And he talked about how you guys are not about, we're not going to just go cut costs. We're going to help you grow. That's our focus is growth. I think that if AI turns out to be that's going to be a really positive outcome, and it'll combat the narrative that, we're going to lose all these jobs. We'll just grow into the productivity that we're just not driving today because of inefficiency. I'd love to end off on a question that this is the first time I'm asking this question, so we'll see how it goes. But what is one point of view that you have today that is contrarian or the market just isn't understanding today?
That's a good question. I need to think about that. Well, I have two things which I think we mentioned that I'm a true believer in. Number one, I think that in AI, for AI to work, at scale in a human-led environment, I think copilot is a terrible idea. That's what I think. I think that it has to be something much more embedded into the process. And I think that scaling it is a much more difficult process than what people see. Cost, complexity, error. I think it's hard. I think it's really, really hard. Again, those are not earth-shattering things. Those are things that just from experience, I think people are just not seeing them the way they should be looking at. I know people thinking about the chat interface and that will take everything out and everything, which is fine for a human-led interaction. But I believe that the true value of AI is driving the automation. Again, human in the loop, human in the middle, all that stuff. But it should drive for that versus actually waiting for the human to come in and ask the question.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time. This was fantastic.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
I really enjoyed my conversation with David, and I took 3 broad takeaways with me. First, AI may expand relationship banking more than it displaces it. A relationship manager can only deeply cover so many companies today. If AI can continuously identify opportunities, prepare the banker, and recommend the next action, banks may be able to provide a higher touch service to a much larger segment of businesses, not simply operate with fewer bankers. Second, the economics of the model matter as much as its intelligence. A company cannot continuously run every possible task through the most expensive frontier model. The durable architecture is more likely to combine proprietary screening, smaller or open weight models, and frontier models reserved for the problems where additional capability actually justify the cost. And third, vertical AI's advantage is not simply a better interface. It's the industry knowledge, specialized data, and decision-making process embedded inside the product. Horizontal platforms such as Salesforce may continue to own the system of record and much of the underlying context, while vertical companies like Sympera compete to own the highest value workflows. Sympera's bet sits at the intersection of all three. Use increasingly efficient AI to encode the judgment of great bankers and make relationship banking available to a scale that was previously uneconomic. Thanks again for watching Terminal Value, and I'll see you on the next episode.